Excellent. Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaching Heroes, the teaching podcast where I ask teachers and educators, what does it take to turn up every day and teach tomorrow's leaders? And today we have another pandemic special episode, and this time we're talking to teachers in Victoria. So the New South Wales context is really different from the Victorian context, who are now in their 7th lockdown in terms of schools. So really interested to hear from a range of educators in Victoria today about what it's like teaching in the lockdown and the impact that has on teachers, on students, and maybe some creative ideas around what we can do to make it better. Okay, so we're going to start off. Leon, you introduce yourself. Where are you located and why did you decide to become a teacher? How long have you been a teacher for?
Thanks, Joe. Look, I've been a teacher for over a decade now. I did my training in the UK and my first teaching job down in London. Worked there for about 18 months before moving out to Australia with my wife, who is Australian, out to Hamilton in Western Victoria. So I work in a regional small Catholic school, Monterey College, and I've held quite a few different roles there. I've been a head of English faculty, I've been a year level coordinator, and I'm currently the director of learning and teaching.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, go.
I was just going to say, I think I fell into teaching, really. I did a degree in English and American literatures in the UK. And at the end of it, I thought, what do you do with a degree in English and American literatures? And an opportunity came up to get into the postgraduate certificate of education course with English and drama, like yourself, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a bit like that when you're a drama teacher. It's like, what else can you do with studying a drama degree? Well, not paid anyway. So right, thanks for coming on the podcast, Leon. I'm Brooke. Tell us.
Hi, my name's Brooke and I am the PYP coordinator and literacy leader at a small little Catholic school in Elwood called St. Columba's Primary School. We have about 160 students, so it's a small little school there. We're an International Baccalaureate Primary Years Program candidate school, so we're going for our authorisation later this year, and that's been a bit of a journey with all of the lockdowns. In terms of why I became a teacher, I think I personally just had a passion for learning myself. It's not so much that I absolutely loved going to school, it's just that I loved the stimulation of learning and had a natural curiosity. And I really felt that there were some teachers that shaped who I was, and I wanted to, I guess, be able to hopefully give that gift to some future students. So I studied teaching, and then a few years down the track, I decided I'd do a Masters of Education, and here I am 14 years later and still loving being a teacher and being in education.
Thank you, Brooke. And Michael is my cousin, loosely kind of, who's joining. We're both in the family business.
Yeah.
But do you think it was just that the fact that we came from a family of teachers that drew you to teaching, or was there something else?
Probably a big bit of it was that for me. So as Joe said, my name is Michael and I teach business studies, economics, commerce and religion. But I'm also what's called the director of the senior campus. So I lead a high school in Melbourne, it's a Catholic Jesuit school, Xavier College. We have about 1,000 students in years 9 to 12 and in inner city Melbourne. And we're also a boarding school. So we have about 60 boarders from all around the world, all around Australia. We have kids from the Northern Territory, students from rural Victoria and southern New South Wales are a predominant area for us. I originally did a business degree and worked in human resources in banking and finance and oil in Australia and in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. And then, had a little bit of a midlife crisis at the age of 25, 18 years ago, and became a teacher, which is a bit of a family business. And a little bit like Brooke, I suppose, just enjoy the idea of working with young people and seeing them grow.
Yeah, great. Well, 3 really different contexts and 3 different contexts that have been hugely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's go back to the beginning. So back in March, if you can remember, what was it like with that first lockdown? And at that stage, the whole country went into lockdown, schools were closed. And also the other thing I was reflecting on yesterday was that there was a kind of common policies at that time, particularly in terms of schools, were kind of started to be directed by the federal government. So the federal government was saying, okay, schools schools are closed, and we were watching kind of Scott Morrison for those updates about when schools, etc., would be open. So let's go back. Yeah, let's go back to March when the school first went into lockdown. What was it like for each of you? Brooke, you want to start? March last year. Yeah, so March 2020, the first one.
Joe, honestly, I just could not believe it. I remember our school saying, earlier in the week, this COVID or coronavirus, this is quite bad and it hasn't really hit Australia too much, but I think our schools will close, and thinking it was ridiculous, thinking there's no way they're going to close the schools. No way that's going to happen. I think what we did, that it's been to a degree really learning on the job. There's been so many skills that teachers have needed to pick up. So I remember during that first lockdown, it was all about upskilling teachers around Zoom, we use a platform called Seesaw for remote learning. It was about getting the kids familiar with those platforms and getting ourselves familiar with those platforms and really working out what are other schools doing. So being a candidate at International Baccalaureate School, and I also have worked with the International Baccalaureate, doing some workshops and training. We had a few connections with the Asia Pacific region, and so we were reaching out to them, going, "What are they'd already gone into lockdown, so we were going, what's been working for you? What have you been doing?" We didn't have much time to prepare, and certainly what we've done has evolved, but just trying to get as many perspectives as we could on really how this could possibly look, because it was just so foreign. So yeah.
Michael, so what happened with the borders? Like, that would have been a real, what did you do with the borders in the first lockdown?
So the first lockdown, as you said, it was a little bit different because we were driven by, not that we were driven by the federal government, but it was also new and unexpected. So when the first lockdown occurred, the whole school shut, and significantly, it's the only time our boarding school has closed. And so outside of that first lockdown, we're the only boarding school in Melbourne that stayed open through the whole pandemic. And so the first time, all the students went home. And that actually created some really significant issues for our overseas boarders. We had at least 2 boys who didn't come back, have not been able to come back into the country. We had one young student who was in year 11 last year who he went back to Sri Lanka. He was a boarder and went back to Sri Lanka and ended up doing the entirety of year 11 online, even when we were back face to face, starting school at 4 o'clock every morning because of the time difference. And so he has now come back. He came back at the end of term 1, was able to get back into Australia, had to quarantine in Sydney, and had some assistance from one of our connected Catholic schools connected up in Sydney that helped us with that. And now he's actually doing the VCE, which is the HSC, over 2 years because of the significance that it had on his schooling. So in the first instance, it was go home, and it was, like everybody else, learning online. And Leon may be able to comment on this one, but I suppose when they're in remote areas, that a number of challenges where you've got students who need to work on farms as well as go to school. They also need to, there are issues with Wi-Fi and connectivity and so forth. I know for rural Victoria, I can't imagine what it's like, but the work that the teachers have done with not just the boarders, but the day students in, as sort of Brooke said, just upskilling each other, the teachers have been absolutely phenomenal in their flexibility and the way they've been able to adapt. So, so for the boarders, it's been a real challenge in terms of that first lockdown in particular.
Yeah. And for you, Leon, out in the country, a complete different experience, I would think, the city's ruining it for you all.
And we've been in a different context from the start. I think we've been locked down for fewer days overall than the city, but every time we come in and out of lockdown, there's a bit of an uncertainty about whether we'll stay in for as long as the city, or we'll be out early, or anything like that. So I think the uncertainty has been a real factor here. As Michael said, the internet is questionable. I'm on a farm myself, so I've got NBN satellite broadband and a limit of about 50 gig a month, which normally lasts for about 3 days. So I taught a lot of my lessons in the first round from the car at the top of the big hill, which is where you get the best cellular reception. But a bit like Brooke said, the first round, I think, was all about professional learning for the teachers. I remember, and my responsibility at the time was the digital platforms, and we used Google Classroom. we'd only been using Google Classroom properly for about 6 months, and only a handful of staff were trialing it. And then all of a sudden we had to flip from that to every member of staff in the school using it with every student. And I just remember running some very bizarre professional learning sessions where our sort of 50 or so teaching staff were arranged across the 700 seats, tiered seating in the stadium, watching this pre-recorded professional learning stuff on how to use Google Classroom, how to set up your classrooms, how to add students, and then putting out YouTube videos for the students to access. And obviously a lot of them couldn't access the videos because of their broadband. So it was a real, it was a slow starter, but you know, I think we got there in the end. But from March 2020, certainly a lot of that work was just getting people used to the new way of doing things.
And what was your response from parents then too? Was there support, angst, uncertain, you know, all of it, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I mean, because of where we are, a lot of our parents are essential services workers in agriculture. And we've got a big employer in the region is the hospital. So we've got a lot of parents who work at the hospitals as well. But most of the students did stay home. We didn't have a lot of students coming in on site. We are a boarding school, but most of the boarders left. The parents, I think, were as supportive as they could be under the circumstances, but bearing in mind that most of them were out working for the whole time. And then, as you said, a lot of the kids ended up working as well, and do now. Like in lockdown 7, we have a lot of students who they'll be out landmarking now and helping with the work on the farms. So, you know, trying to manage exactly how much we do live and how much we do asynchronous to support them to be able to do that as well. It's, you know, we recognize that what they're doing while they're working at home is as valuable as anything that we can give them.
Yes, well, I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, as you said, that very essential services. I mean, food and hospitals, you can't necessarily get them, but that must have an impact on the student. Like I'm just thinking about the impact on the year 12 students or the, you know, the later year students, where that would have an impact on their schooling and their progression.
Yeah, I think our year 12s at the moment are probably the flattest of the bunch. They're just sick of the uncertainty, like, you know, like the year 12s up in New South Wales would be, like the year 12s across Victoria would be. It's the uncertainty of whether we're going to be in, out, the date around the GATs, whether the exams will be moved, the directive from VCAR that they're not going to remove any of the Unit 4 content because some schools have already started teaching it and it would be inequitable. All of that, I think, has built up the frustration. I think our year 12s last year handled it pretty well. And one thing that the current year 12s have seen is that last year's year 12 cohort, they got to where they wanted to be, irrespective of everything that happened. And so this year's year 12s, at least, they think, you know, they're pretty confident that they're going to get into the courses that they want to get into or the jobs that they want to do eventually.
I think one of the key differences this year to last year has been that, and I totally understand and support why it's been the case, but last year when the lockdowns were on, we had a sense of, or an understanding of the length. And so for us, we actually, in the first lockdown last year and then at various stages, we went to a completely kind of flipped model, sort of a university style model, where we went from being a 6-period-a-day school to a 3-period-a-day school and having the kids do sort of tutes and asynchronous learning after lunch. And when you had 7 or 8 weeks of knowledge of that's how it's going to work, you're able to do that. Whereas with this year, and again, I totally understand why it's been the case, but it's been, we're short, sharp lockdown for a week. And then in this most recent experience, that's then gone to another week, and then it's gone to a fortnight. And then today we think we'll hear more information. And so I think, I can't really speak, I suppose, for Brooke and Leon, but we found this year the ability to build momentum has been a little bit different, because you're sort of planning for a week rather than planning for 6 or 7 weeks. And I think that's had a real impact on the 12s. We talked a lot last year about our year 11s and the impact that it would have for them next year in terms of their introduction to the VC last year. And so I think in some ways, the latest lockdown, the last few weeks, at least, they've had a little bit more clarity in where they're headed, which I think has been good. But I'd agree with Leon, the 12s are just, they're flat. They're flat.
Michael, I would absolutely agree with you in terms of, going into this current lockdown 7, thinking that it might only be a week, and then it's like, oh wait, no, it might be 2 weeks. Okay, and and I'm the same. I totally get why that has to be the case, but for coming from a different perspective, I know it would have been super hard for those year 12 students, but I know we're seeing it too, even with our prep students, our prep and year 1 students who really do need a lot of teacher support and a lot of adult support really to build their learning. And so one of the things that we do is we have small group sessions throughout the day, but we also in the junior years would send home, books for them to read. And even though, it's not particularly socio-constructivist in the way we would usually go, templates for them to work on just to help support the parents. And we're having to where every time there's a bit more of a introduction of lockdown, we're going, okay, should we make up some more kind of packs for these early learners? And then going, not knowing how long we're going to be in there has certainly shaped, the way that we've planned, I would say.
Yeah, and the kinder year 1, I mean, all students really, but particularly in those early years, that the relationship with the teacher is so important, and taking that away has such an impact. And I know I have a 7-year-old in year 1, and that term away he had with his kindy teacher had such an impact, and took a while to build back up again. And then he's just got the most beautiful year 1 teacher now, and it's like, wow, it's been weeks and weeks without her. You can see his attitude to learning is just really plummeted.
Absolutely, and such an important time for social and emotional learning too, Phyllis. Quite a few of our kids are only children, and they're really, lots of our kids are struggling in any case, just, dealing with the uncertainty, but particularly some of those students who are only children are, really missing that connection with their peers too. And for our younger students, that learning around how to be a friend and how to play together, and those important skills too.
Yeah. So, Michael, you said, so the boarding is still open now, and you were saying, but I think this was before we started recorded, you were saying that no one's allowed into the boarding area except for, say, yourself. Yeah. So how is that being managed?
So we've basically set up, so the boarding house has remained open since after lockdown 1, and different times of the year. But second half of last year, we had all of our students stay, all bar 1. Who went home, had a family member that had an accident. And so last year we had to spread the boys into alternative accommodation, and we were lucky enough that I mentioned earlier that we're a Jesuit school, and we had a retreat centre just down the road from the school, so we were actually able to accommodate some of the boys there. But now they're all back on site. And so basically it's what's called a closed site. And so we have staff that live at the school. We have our head of boarding and our assistant head of boarding, and then our boarding assistants. And we have cleaning staff and catering staff that come in. And our principal and our rector of our school both live on site. And so then I have I'm what's considered to be an essential worker. And so I'm an authorised worker. So I have the ability to come on site because I have what's called the in loco parentis, which is the legal responsibility for the students. Okay. But other than that, at the moment, basically it's a closed site. So nobody else is able to come onto the campus. And so that's meant we do have circumstances like, so at the moment we've got students in the VCE, particular students are able to come on for essential assessment. So we just have to be very careful about where we do that. Do we use we've got another campus not too far away, a primary campus, do we use that? So basically the borders, we have a couple of wellbeing staff as well that come in, like a physical wellbeing staff and one of our counsellors come onto the site. And so effectively the boys are locked in to the school. We're on 40 acres in Melbourne, which we're very lucky to have. So the boys have access to the facilities, they have access to the gym, they have access to the pool. I think really significantly.
I'm a little jealous.
Well, that's the thing. They have access to each other. They have access to each other. And so, if one of the boarders has their 18th birthday, they sit around and have we have a fire pit, and the boys will sit around, and obviously it's not like a normal 18th. We have some McFlurries and so forth, and the boys celebrate. The big thing is the absence from family. We have a really great contingent of First Nations students from the Northern Territory. So they're all heading back on Friday of this week, but each time they go home, they need to go into the Howard Springs facility and quarantine for 2 weeks. And so one of their parents needs to take time off work to to go in with them. And thankfully, the Northern Territory government have been fantastic. So they allow for one parent to go in and supervise all of the students. At times, we've sent a staff member up who goes into Howard Springs and isolates with them and helps them. They did their Year 11 exams in Howard Springs in the facility last semester. So it's really difficult for the New South Wales boys at the moment because for everybody else, there's a certainty about getting back. But for our New South Wales students, it's very difficult for us to predict if they go home, and we've got a few that are outside of there's like a border bubble, border bubble in terms of the actual physical border up on New South Wales Victorian border. But if you're outside that, at the moment, we can't predict when you'd be allowed to come back. We've had a few boys go home this week and just felt they really needed to get back to family. And so we're working, the Australian Boarding Schools Association has been fantastic at working with the government and trying to get some clarity around when those boys will be able to come back. So yeah, it's not all bad. It's not all bad at the boarding house, that's for sure.
What a tough decision for families. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking, God, like, what would I want for my boys, living in this context at the moment, which you all experienced last year in the second wave in Victoria, really that sense of when's it, I mean, at least we have vaccines now, right? So there's kind of some sort of endpoint, but man, I wouldn't know what to do as a mother because I can see that life in the boarding school, there'd be a lot of benefits of being with their friends but yeah, you want to be with your family as well.
Yeah, it is, and Leon might have a view. It is a different mindset though, because a boarding family knows that their kids are normally going for a sustained period of time. Most of our Victorian boarders go home at least once or twice a term.
Yeah.
Our interstate boarders and our overseas boarders may go home once a year. We've got a young guy from Canada. And so I guess we have great conversation at the start of boarding about what it's like. I can't imagine what it'd be like, but to say to your kids, you're heading off to this different opportunity. And it's interesting. A lot of our boarding is driven by the students. Whenever I enroll boarders, they talk about this is what they want for themselves. So I guess I know what you're saying, Joe, and I'd be the same. I'm not sure if I could do it with my kids, but having said that, it's a fantastic experience. Boarding is a brilliant experience, and there is a different mindset about, my child is going off for a different educational experience.
Yeah, I guess it's just that uncertainty, right? About at least then in a normal boarding situation, you'd say, oh, they're coming home for that weekend. Right. Whereas that uncertainty of when, and particularly now in the current context of the pandemic, it's just... Yeah.
We had boys who literally didn't leave the premises for 8 months last year, did not step off the school premises for 8 months.
I think, Michael, I know this isn't quite related, but I'm thinking about some of our teachers too. Some of our teachers, staff are really finding that difficult if they're from overseas or they're, from interstate, and they're usually people who are able to go home and visit their mums and dads or their brothers and sisters in Europe or in UK or in Western Australia or wherever. I think everyone's finding it hard. The kids would find it especially hard, but the teachers are finding that difficult too, just like everyone else in Australia probably.
Yeah. And so it's a really good point now, I think, to really talk about the mental health and wellbeing of the students. And Leon, interested to hear I've just been thinking about your students who would be at home working on the farm, which would, I think, be a hard experience, but probably quite rewarding as well. But what is the impact of them being separated from their friends or from their schoolwork? And is that having a toll, do you think, on their mental health in maybe ways we might not be obvious? They might not be depressed or anxious, but there would be a kind of other impact around, them being part of a school community that would be absent at this time.
Yeah, look, I think you see it when they come back in the gaps in between lockdowns, which seem to be decreasing at the moment. But when they do come back in on site, their relationships with one another have definitely changed to what they were in the past. So take the Year 12s for an example. It's really difficult even just getting them to talk to each other and work in groups and do that kind of work. They're almost coming into the classroom and then they're flipping their laptops up and working remotely, next to each other on the desks, which is a bit bizarre. The younger year levels, I think, they come back in, and particularly this happened last year, but the Year 9s and 10s come back in for 1 week of term. that's pretty much write off. They want to socialize, they want to hang out, they want to do anything but work, and you can't really blame them for that. Because our students are probably split between kids who are out on the farms, and they're probably used to a little bit more isolation anyway. But then we've got a lot of town kids. We've got kids from Portland, which is about an hour away. I think they're probably the ones who miss the social interaction the most. And you have to remember as well that down here, I think in our shire, there have only ever been 2 reported cases of the virus since March last year.
Yeah.
So I might be slightly out of date on that, but it's certainly not into double figures.
And how do you,
so that makes it harder.
Yeah, and so how do you, does that create a sense of why are we doing it, or is there a kind of frustration there around why you're closed, or do you get it, or what's?
There've been frustrations, and sort of obvious frustrations, I think, where we've been in and out of lockdown, and it's caused that kind of confusion, and it seems to hinge a lot on when the city goes into lockdown.
Yes.
Lockdown 6 in Victoria for us only lasted for 2 days, so it was sort of the opposite of the threat of the extending lockdown. Is on the Friday we went into lockdown, and then got told at 4 p.m. on the Monday that we were coming back in on the Tuesday.
Yeah.
Suddenly sort of pivoted back in again, but then a few weeks later we were back out. So like we said earlier, it is just the uncertainty, I think, that has the biggest mental health thing that happen next.
Yeah. And how are the kids going, Brooke? How are your younger years going in terms of mental health impact and parents and?
Oh, I think parents, some parents are really struggling, potentially working from home and then also trying to support their students. I think we've got a really big array of students. Some students quite like working from home. They feel that they when you survey them, they say, no, I like it. I get things done in my own time. And particularly I'm thinking more our year 3 to year 6 students who perhaps have a little bit more independence. But I can say that when they come back, the kids are so happy to be back. You see them skipping through the gate.
Yeah.
They really have. We were surprised last year. We anticipated a lot more perhaps social issues or other things coming up when there was a return to school, but our kids were fantastic when they returned to school and they were really happy to be there. I'm not sure, because of the in and out nature and because this one's there's been more uncertainty around it, I'm not sure how they'll come back this time, whether they will find whether they're becoming a little bit more cynical about being back at school and being like, oh, well, how long is this going to last for now? I'm not sure, but generally when they're upon return to school, the students have coped really well with that. But the remote learning, I think probably has been a particular challenge for parents too.
And how much work gets done? Like how many students are actually doing work and handing in work, would you say?
I'd say we have quite a lot of students who are doing work and handing in work. We've moved. Last year we had a little bit more of a task-based approach where students would get tasks and they'd do it in their own time. Yeah. And we'd still had our live classes, but this year particularly we've moved to much more of a small group model where students are seen, they get together all in the morning and then they're seen in small groups another 2 or 3 times a day. And so a lot of the time it will be that they'll start something in a little small group with a teacher and then they'll continue that work, maybe for, depending on the age group, maybe for another 20 minutes or half an hour after the Zoom session finishes, and then upload that to Seesaw. So we're getting quite a good, I think that in terms of learning loss, our students are actually doing quite well. However, I think that also the longer things go on, and we saw this last year, the longer things go on, the more of a bit of a dropout there is of students who they're enthusiastic at first and then it starts to wane as things go on, as probably it does for everyone.
Yeah. And is there the opposite? I'm thinking in our household, it's kind of had the opposite effect. Like when we thought it was just a week, we were like, it's okay, don't worry, don't do anything, it's fine. Have a bit of extra holiday. You know, it's impossible to work, and as a parent anyway, it's possible to work and to, you know, just do what you like. And then as the weeks have gone on, we're like, okay, we're in week 9 now. Okay, maybe there is certainly that too. And you know, and it's been hard for lots of people too, because the lockdown seemed to be getting called later and later. So the last one was, you know, Thursday at 5:30 or something, 5:30 p.m. And it was like, okay, everyone needs to be at school tomorrow. And look, we called that day a Flexi Friday. So I think the kids met in the morning, and then they had tasks because it just wasn't too practical to start up exactly where you left off when it's called, you know, 5:30. I'd be on it's open. It's supposed to be open. Take him.
That's been interesting that the last 2 maybe or 3 lockdowns have been called late in the day and late in the week. And again, totally understand that the government's got to make really discerned decisions, which they do. But where we get to the point where we've got 1,000 students and they're older students. We have really good mobile phone policies, but all the kids have them, and so it's really interesting by lunchtime. Or from recess on, there's prediction on, do you think we're going in? Do you think we're going in? And the boys are talking about it. And then we will actually put stuff out to the students to say, at 2 o'clock, okay, so while we don't have anything specific, we do have an indication that there may well be a lockdown coming, so you need to take everything with you. And for certain staff, that means particular equipment from the school.
Yes.
You know, like our careers staff have really specific equipment they may need to take home and so forth. So there's almost like this, I wouldn't say it's betting, but there's this predicting that goes on at the school about whether we're going in or not. It makes it difficult.
I have another friend that teaches in Victoria, and he said he's a kind of casual teacher, so he was casual teaching just before this last one was set, and so he's in the middle of teaching, and then apparently there was like a siren or there was a bell that was like the lockdown indication. And then, or he said all the kids' heads just dropped on the desk. And he's like, what? It's like, it's a lockdown. It's like,
On lockdown 1, the very first lockdown, we actually had a small, it's 5 minutes, it's a small fire at the school, a smoke issue. And so we actually had an evacuation. And so the evacuation went off and we all went down to the main oval, and the boys thought that was the way in which we were telling them that the lockdown was coming. And I spent an hour saying to kids, do you really think I'd do it this way?
Like the total opposite COVID safe way.
Yes.
You all together.
But Michael, you're right. We've started to too, because we have a number of students who don't have their own computers or laptops, or need access to be on Zoom and to be on Seesaw. We've started bundling desperately as it gets to 1 o'clock and you hear news that there might be lockdown, starting to pull them all out and make sure they're charged and putting them in bags and sending them home with students, because you just don't know. It's better to be kind of safe than sorry in a lot of ways.
Yes, yeah. And so that kind of points to an equity issue. So how have you, I'm sure in each of your contexts that there would be students who, let's be blunt, who are safer at school and who don't have the support and access at home that, some of us have. How do you all manage that in 3 really different contexts?
I think the first I say is it's really difficult.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult space, but I can go, you go, Leon.
No, cheers. We've sort of redeployed our learning support staff a lot. So they're doing check-ins and meets with small groups of students very regularly now, where they would have been doing interventions and things like multi-lit or MacLit outside of the classroom. All of that time and their entire timetables are now devoted to, cycling through those, I guess we would call them the at-risk students or the pointy end students. But then the year level coordinators, the faculty leaders, anybody who's got a bit more of a time allotment, they're using a lot of that time for checking in on students. And that's students across the board. So we've got about 530 students. So we're just making sure that everybody's checking in very regularly. I mean, one thing we've noticed in the last 2 lockdowns is our attendance that we record through, Meet attendance, Google Meet attendance, and also who's done the work, has actually gone up quite significantly, which I think indicates that the kids are a bit sick of it now, that the fact that they're all actually turning up to all of these lessons because they've got nothing else to do, and they're sort of over it. But when they're not attending and when the red flags start to go up, that's when the learning support staff and the year level coordinators really come into their own.
I'd say for us, it's very similar. We have, our diverse learning team, again, working really closely with our students. We have a tutor group and a house system. And so normally our tutor group, the students meet with their tutor in the middle of the day, but we've moved that to the morning. So there's a check-in every morning with every student. In terms of students that, and you sort of said, Joe, let's speak bluntly, students that are at risk at home. The government has been good at putting in place provisions, I guess, for students. So last year we had a number of students that were on site the entire year, and we do this year as well. It's been interesting how it changes at various times. So you would know, Joe, that there's been staggered returns to school. So at some points you've got, I think it's prep and grade 1 and 11 and 12 back on site. And then that changes again a little bit, who can come on and who can't come on with other students. But ultimately our teachers and our broader staff at the school have just been incredible at making sure that they are constantly in conversation with students, putting in place a really strong physical wellbeing program. So we have physical programs on, exercise programs every morning and afternoon for the boys. Our faith program has gone online, and so trying to do proactive steps. But yeah, just as Leon said, trying to those teachers that have time have that opportunity just to be checking in as constantly as possible with students. But it's a difficult space. It's the equity issue is massive across COVID.
Yeah, that's right. Not just in schools, but in Brooke.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's very similar to what everyone's said before, in terms of we have our learning support officers who support our students who are on site, and that includes vulnerable children or children with kind of learning disabilities or learning difficulties. We have members of our leadership team who aren't in classrooms and who have more time where they're not in contact with students on Zoom, checking in with parents and checking in with students. Like Michael said, we have really made a concerted effort within all our lessons and with all the times where students are face-to-face in terms of an online setting with teachers, to build in wellbeing and to build in conversations around how students are feeling and to follow that up. And I guess, real red flags are if we know that a student hasn't turned up or if they haven't submitted any work, to be really onto that and to really make contact as soon as possible. And in terms of equity of resources, things like computers going home, things like and I don't even have the proper the IT technology, sorry about this, but like the internet support systems, sending them home, the dongles. For dongles, the dongles, sending them home for any families who don't have internet access, and those kind of little steps. But it is hugely difficult. We're lucky that we're a really close community, and so the teachers all pretty much know the students all know the teachers, so there's a lot of trust between students and teachers and families, which really helps.
Yeah,
I think, Joe, we're sort of melding wellbeing and equity here, but I think a big thing's also constantly asking the kids what they need. Like, we've been doing surveying of the kids all the way through. Yep. We have a great group of student leaders last year and this year, but we also have what's called a student voice committee, which is a group of students who come together. They're not elected, but they come together on a weekly basis just to talk about what they need at school. And so they're constantly giving us feedback about what the day is looking like. We've literally just, when the last extension to the lockdown came into place, we changed our timetable again. And so we've stuck with 6 periods this time, knowing they're sort of theoretically short-term lockdowns, but we've actually, we had long breaks between the periods, and the students came back to us and said, listen, we'd rather have shorter breaks between the periods and finish earlier in the day. So a week ago, we shifted that. And so now that the school day finishes at 2:50 rather than 3:30, but less breaks in between. So I think constantly asking the students, and we ask the staff and we ask the parents as well, but listening to the kids, I suppose, about what they need, because they'll tell you.
Yeah. And how do all of you, because you've all got families and, you know, I know Michael at least has young children as well who need to be, who are also, you know, doing schoolwork, and, you know, your wife's a teacher as well. So you're essential workers. So how are you managing your own families at home with these huge commitments? I mean, you really do, as teachers, have a whole school community, you know, parents and young children in kind of the palms of your hands that, you know, and you go into teaching, you know, all of you said about, you know, giving back. So you have this kind of service mentality within you, but also, how do you manage your own well-being and your own family's well-being? Hello.
We're laughing because my 2-year-old son's just walked into the room like he was summoned, and my 5-year-old daughter's crying in the background, so obviously something's happened. Well, that's probably case in point. I think I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we're lucky enough that the 5-year-old does get to go to kinder a couple of days a week.
Yes.
And sometimes I'm working from the office when the internet doesn't hold out, but yeah, he's 2 years old, so lockdown's been pretty much his entire life since day one. I guess he's just used to it. I think it would probably be difficult if like yourself, Joe, and Michael, from what you've just said, with older school age children. These guys are pretty manageable. I'm lucky as well that my wife is at home in crowd control.
Yeah, but it must be hard because I've got, you know, my husband's business just doesn't work. He's in the music industry, so it just shuts down in COVID. So, and he's at home, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's, you know, available as well. I mean, it's really tough. He was just talking yesterday about, you know, he's their best mate, he's their teacher, he's their dad, he's the, you know, he's got to take on this whole role while I'm working. So that, you know, you have to manage that as a partner as well. It's not just, you know, you want to make sure that your partner's okay as well.
I live in I've got the opposite thing. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't have any kids, just a lovely dog who he likes to pop his head into our Zoom sessions, and I've just started to make him, he's just part of the Zoom sessions now. The kids know him. He gets into my recordings. We have a laugh. That's just the way it is. But my husband is in essential work. He's a locksmith, so he's usually at work. But on the few days that he has, they did have a bit of a lockdown where they locked down even some of the essential work, and he was at home. I found that really, really hard too, not because I love him dearly, but just in terms of the space too, and in terms of, you know, you're on the computer the whole time, you're on Zoom sessions, you know, managing that's hard, and it's hard to switch off. I mean, it's hard to switch off as a teacher anyway, but it's particularly hard to switch off when you know there's not a lot of other things to do and you're getting emails and other things going on. So really trying and kind of, yeah, you're not having that bell that goes, okay, it's lunchtime now, just stand up for, you know, a few moments, you know. Yeah, so just trying to keep myself accountable, I think, has been the main thing in kind of maintaining some kind of mental health, I suppose.
Yeah,
we got 2 staff at our school who are husband and wife. They no children. They live in a 1-bedroom apartment in the city of Melbourne, and they're both trumpet teachers.
Oh, jeez, Michael, that would be hard. That would be very hard.
Yeah, and so from time to time they come into sight, but it amazes me what that would be like in that house. So I think for us,
more neighbours. I have to say, neighbours.
We just manage. I suppose. Like I've got one in year 7. And one in year 4. With our daughter in year 4, she tends to go out into more of an open plan area, and I suppose that's sort of so we can go past a bit more often. But then, whereas my older daughter Claire is in a room in her bedroom and has a desk set up, I'm incredibly blessed. You mentioned, Joe, that I'm married to a teacher. I am too, and so Bronwyn is in a leadership role herself. She's the head of justice education, but she has been incredible because I know for me, I'm doing, you know, it's a long day and you're working with students, but you're also working with staff. And the COVID changes when you're trying to change the school constantly. I have an incredible team, an incredible, I've mentioned a couple of times, incredible group of staff, but I have an incredible leadership team at the school who have just worked tirelessly, but as has Bronwyn. And we've got a good roster going with dinner and different people on every night. Claire did home cooked pasta last night, so and you just use your weekends well and I don't, obviously you can't go out, but just to try to refresh a little bit, and go for walks and stuff like that. So you get by, I suppose.
Yeah, that has been the benefit. We've gone on bush, we've been in our area in Western Sydney for like 10 years and we haven't gone on we've never been on some of the walks we've been on before. It's like, oh wow, this is just down the road.
To watch kids learn. The thing is to watch your kids learn is an experience that we don't often get. And so as hard as everything is, and Brooke at times has taught my daughter, and we've been watching that and listening to that and looking at the learning happening is something I'll cherish forever, I have to say. Like, it's been amazing.
Oh, that's very true. Being even more aware of the special relationship my 7-year-old in particular has with his year 1 teacher. I mean, she's just heaven sent, really, and just love how she's made sure she keeps in contact with him. Has been exceptional. So you do definitely have an extensive appreciation for, if I didn't already, for teachers and who they are. Hello, little man. So just finishing off, so I was really thinking last night about, it really hit me that particularly in this current variant, the Delta variant that's going around, schools are going to have to change. So even when schools open again, most likely going forward, we're going to have to rethink how we do school. And is it more outdoors classrooms or, I mean, I think you guys teach in masks, but I think, from October, our teachers in New South Wales will be teaching in masks. But that's a whole new, pedagogy, really. And I've seen people talking about us needing to update ventilation in classrooms. And I mean, what do you think? I guess my question is, what do we need to make sure we hold on to in schools? And how can we creatively adapt to this, new world? Big question.
That's a massive question, Joe.
We've gone pretty well. I'm a senior English teacher.
Yeah.
And one thing that we've done this year, I think, is that we've reused all of the videos and things of ourselves talking rubbish about Pride and Prejudice that we used last year.
Yeah.
That's my daughter in the background. We've reused all of those as sort of tutorial style material so that the students can access them in the classroom whenever. And whilst 2020 us are teaching the classes, we can actually go around and talk to individual students.
Yeah.
We've also partnered up this year with the University of Melbourne on their new metrics research project. And that's given us a massive shift really in our whole 9 to 12 curriculum in particular, which has become from next year onwards a lot more flexible. So the students have got a lot more time in their timetable to do what they want to do. Because we've cut a lot of content out of the curriculum, all of the core subjects have given up time, which has never happened before, but they've as a result of COVID, they've seen that it is possible to cut back significantly on the content.
Yeah, right. I hadn't thought of that.
I think from our perspective, we're just trying to utilise outdoor spaces as much as possible. We've got a kitchen garden. We've already been doing this, but having all the windows open in the classroom, no matter what the temperature. The kids are already in a really good routine of hand washing. And I think, it's a really hard question moving forward. What's the most important thing? I know that we could probably utilise the types of teaching that we're doing now in the classroom more, but I think it's also that balance of when the kids are at school, wanting them also to have connection with each other and being able to have time to play and have time to be with the teacher and have time to be with each other as well. So it's a hard balance between, I suppose, transitioning and preparing them for remote learning situations, but also cherishing that time that they have in the classroom when they are at school and making that the best time possible, I suppose. But it has been amazing. It has been amazing, Leon, like you said, that knowing that there's areas of the curriculum that you don't have as much time in the day to teach all different manner of subjects, but knowing too that students are actually still achieving quite well in most cases. So it does show you that, yeah, I suppose there are, I don't like to use the word shortcuts, but there are really important learning pieces that will continue on in spite of remote learning.
Yes.
I think the first thing I'd say is it taught us that nothing replaces the classroom. And we talk a lot about what we call side-to-side learning, and it's particularly with COVID, we've noticed it, and it's that learning where you might be saying something to the students and then looking to maybe put up a slide or put something on the board or hand, and then the student will say to the person next to them, so what did he mean by that? And that learning they get from each other,
yes,
I think has been one of the biggest casualties of COVID. And so that's the first thing I think that it's shown us, that while there's lots to take advantage of, I don't think anything replaces the classroom. But I also do think particularly for senior school, it probably is going to help. I think if we can take advantage of some of the use of technology, the way in which the kids can interact like this after school, I don't think, they would do group work at home, but they wouldn't do it face to face. And I think there may be a real opportunity to help with the transition to tertiary study. And I think that the VCE and the HSC is a certain type of tool that is done in a way which is often quite different to what then university looks like. And I actually think it's allowed us to get some really great synergy in what the transition to tertiary study is going to look like for students. So there are probably a couple of things that we've spoken about.
Yeah. And just lastly, in New South Wales, they've mandated vaccination for teachers, and, not expecting any of you to reveal your personal opinion about that at all, but what is it? I mean, I'm sure it's coming in Victoria as well. What do you think the general sense is going to be from the teaching population about that? Do you think it's expected, like people were waiting for it?
I'm not sure if I would say that. I'd say that Brooke talked about the fact that when the students come back, they just want to come into school.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same for teachers as well. People want to be at school. And so, I think staff and students are just really at the point where they want to be back again. And, 2 years is a long time. And so I think that, particularly as the year goes on, we get closer and closer to the VCE. I think, and Leon, I'm not sure in your circumstance, but I think a lot of the year 12s are at the point they just want to get back in and start to rip in and get it done. It's hard for them because they're supposed to be at that point that they're ready to go from school as well. So I think that obviously the vaccination targets are another tool that are going to help our students and our staff and our society get back to where they need to be.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you all for, sharing your experiences. Has been really eye-opening in such 3 different contexts, and, the rolling lockdowns you guys have had down there. And, I'm just blown away by the resilience of you all and from your staff, and how you're just getting on with it, and, proving once again how innovative teachers can really be. So thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I really appreciate it, and stay safe down there, stay well, and hopefully we'll get back into the classroom with I miss my students too. So hopefully we get to see them all soon. Okay, so stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael and Brooke.
Thanks.